Hello, my name is Suzanne Olvey, and we are here at Stone Soup PDX in downtown Portland. I'm the operations manager here. I've been working here for about 3 years, a little over 3 years. And here at Stone Soup, we do many things, but our primary focus is a culinary training program for folks in Portland or neighboring areas as well who are experiencing barriers to employment. We work them through a 12-week program, working on cover letters, resumes, job skills, interpersonal skills, as well as culinary, like technical training. And by the end of those 12 weeks, they either have an externship or a job. And today, I'm going to work with Brussels sprouts and give you a quick recipe to make with Brussels sprouts that you get in your winter CSA box, or you can pick them up at the Portland Farmers Market. So these Brussels sprouts I have just quickly rinsed. Sometimes they get a little bit of dirt or buggies in here in between all the little layers. So we're just going to quickly pull off some of these outer leaves that have a little bit of discoloration or sometimes just bugs. That's kind of what happens when you don't use pesticides. So as I pull the leaves off, I'm just going to trim off the little stem at the end. It gets a little bit tough. And some of these, like this one, is a pretty big little Brussels sprout here. So I'm going to actually quarter these. But if you have smaller ones, sometimes they're more like quarter sized. You can just cut them in half. And I'm going to quarter these larger ones because I want them to cook evenly with some of the smaller ones if you have like mixed sizes. And ultimately, they'll just cook faster. So as you cut these into quarters, some more of the little leaves on the outside are going to start falling off. Just don't worry about those too much. You can just kind of mix them into the rest. As you roast them, they'll get nice and brown and crispy. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of the Brussels sprout, the little outer crispy leaves that brown up. So for this recipe, we're going to make just a quick salad that you can serve warm or chilled. I love that kind of versatility. And it's also a vegan version of like honey mustard, basically. So we're going to use maple syrup in the dressing today. But if you have honey, like local honey that you can get at your farmer's market as well, you can use that instead. It's really any kind of sweetener. You can use agave even. Whatever you have around is going to be great. So we have cleaned and cut all of these. You can see we cut them from the top down to the stem. So we cut them long ways, I guess, tall ways. So they're still kind of stuck together in little wedges, but we do have a few of the little leaves still coming off, and that is perfect. So into this bowl, I'm going to add a half a cup of my extra virgin olive oil. And this is just going to be to coat the Brussels sprouts with some fat. And this fat will help conduct all of the heat in our nice super hot oven that we have going at 450 right now. So I'm just going to go in here with my hands. I like to use my hands as much as possible. I like to make sure everything is super shiny and glossy with fat in there. And then we're going to add a couple of teaspoons of salt. So nice coating of salt in here. And we have a pretty sweet, honey mustard and maple mustard is kind of a sweet dressing. So it's okay to have these be salty, and we want to give it enough salt so that as they cook, the salt kind of gets into all the layers of the Brussels sprouts. So we're going to get in there again with our hands and mix it up until it's all super nicely coated with our oil and our salt and our pepper. And then I'm also going to add in here a couple of tablespoons of fresh thyme. Get some nice herbaceous flavor in there. And I'm not super particular about measuring the thyme. I love thyme, so I'm just adding as much as my heart desires. And so we have a nice little mixture here. And then I have a baking sheet, just your average aluminum baking sheet with parchment paper on it. This is going to prevent our Brussels sprouts from sticking to our baking sheet, but still gives you nice contact to make some nice brown flavors happen. So I always put Brussels sprouts face down. So these nice flat edges that we cut in here, put them face down on the sheet. And when this baking sheet gets super hot in our super hot oven, it's going to give us nice brown caramelization on our Brussels sprouts. So we can just kind of pour these out on here and just flip them as we need to. We want to make sure there's a little bit of space between all of these. We don't want it super crowded. So if you feel like it's super piled up on here, just grab a bigger baking sheet so you can spread them out. That spreading out will help get all of the surfaces nice and brown that we can. Otherwise, they'll just sort of steam in here and they won't get that yummy roasty flavor. Another cool thing about this recipe is that you can really use what you have for a lot of these elements. So you can still do this recipe just as easily on the stove. So you can do exactly these same steps, but put all of your Brussels face down in a cast iron skillet or like a nonstick pan or any kind of saute pan. And I would add just like a little splash of water and cover them so that they kind of get steamed in there a little bit, but that bottom layer is still getting nice and brown and crispy in your pan. So you can do this on the stove or in the oven. So this is what my Brussels sprouts look like. No cut edges left behind. They're all face down. And we're just gonna pop this into the oven for about 12 to 15 minutes or so. I'm going to grab a fork too so that in about that 12-minute range, we can go in and poke one of the biggest ones and make sure that my fork gets through it. But really the main indicator we're looking for is that nice brown, crispy outer layer, crispy outer edges. Our next step is to make the dressing. So while this is in the oven, I can already smell the thyme like roasting away in there. So I love this dressing because it's one of my favorite ways to make dressing, where you just put it all in a container and shake it up. So that's what we're going to do. I've got Dijon mustard here. You can use any kind of mustard for this, or like a mixture of Dijon and like whole grain or stone ground. It's really up to you. I like the smooth, kind of tangy, spicy flavor of Dijon, but I also love the texture of the whole grain mustard seeds if you want to throw some of those in there. So I've got Dijon mustard, olive oil, about 1/3 of a cup of olive oil, and that was 1/2 cup and 2 tablespoons of Dijon, and then a couple tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. And for this recipe in particular, it's going to talk a little bit to the sweetness of our maple syrup or our honey, whichever you choose to use, while adding a little bit of tang to our recipe as well. So I've got 1/2 cup of maple syrup in here. And this can be your honey or agave or whatever you choose to put in here. Date syrup would be yummy. So to sort of balance our sweetness and our tang, we're going to add some more salt in here. We've got 2 teaspoons of salt, and then 1.5 teaspoons of fresh ground black pepper. And now for the fun part. I usually use a mason jar at home. If you have anything that with like a secure lid, that should work. So right now it does not look like dressing, but give it a good shake. You can also get in here with a whisk if you want to, if you don't want to shake it around. But I love the ease of this. Less dishes, and it's already in the container you can store it in. So we're looking for a nice, smooth consistency. And we really are just trying to emulsify everything in here. So our mustard is going to help our olive oil and our maple kind of be friends. So there we go. Container of honey mustard. And this is much more than we'll need for our recipe today, but bonus, you get some honey mustard to keep in your fridge, to keep making this recipe or for dressing salads or whatever you want to use this for. So we've got our cutting board back in place. We've got our dressing ready to go, and we just have a few more minutes left on our Brussels. So I'm going to actually pull these out for just a minute. Look at that. Oh, they're already looking so good. So I'm just going to carefully move over some of these Brussels sprouts to make room for our almonds on here. So while I'm doing this, I'm going to check a couple of these and check the bottoms and make sure they're getting nice and brown and toasty. They're not quite there yet, so it's a good thing we still have a few more minutes on these. But I'm going to take a cup of whole almonds, and I'm just going to sprinkle them right onto this pan, which is already nice and hot, so it doesn't need a ton of time to toast the almonds. And that just really brings out the almond flavor and makes them, in my opinion, makes them a little more crunchy too. If you don't have almonds at home, you can use any nut really. Pecans, hazelnuts would be great, walnuts. And also if you have a nut allergy that you're working with, you can use like pumpkin seeds would be delicious, sunflower seeds, anything that you have really. We're just looking for that kind of nutty crunch factor. It really complements those toasty brown bits on the Brussels sprouts. So those flavors kind of complement each other. So that's why we're adding in the nuts. So we'll wait a few more minutes for those to get nice and toasty. You'll start to smell them. It almost smells like cookies baking to me. So in a few minutes, we'll pull those out, and we'll just keep an eye on these last few minutes. We'll just keep an eye on the sprouts and the almonds to make sure they don't get too brown. But we'll let them get all toasty in there, and then we'll be ready to assemble our salad. This looks awesome. So this is what we're looking for. We've got nice brown almonds, got nice brown Brussels sprouts. We're just going to take those out and let them cool for just a moment. Just enough so that we can touch them. So our last little thing is we're going to chop up our Brussels and chop up our almonds or whatever nuts you're using and compose our salad. So if you need to pluck a little bit more thyme, we're going to add a couple big pinches of thyme at the end so that we get that fresh thyme flavor as well as the nice roasty thyme flavor. So you can just kind of run your fingers down the stems of the fresh thyme to get all the leaves off. This one is pretty tender, so if you have some of the pieces that just break off of the stem, they're edible too, but just make sure you don't have any of the woody pieces in there. You can see I'm just making a kind of a pile of these. I don't want it much bigger than my hand because I don't want to lose control of it, but I'm just going to quickly run my knife through all of these Brussels sprouts. And I want to break up the long pieces. I want to kind of cut them this way, laterally, so that we get nice kind of shredded pieces. But you don't have to be too particular about it. We just want to shred up these Brussels so that they kind of start to break apart a little bit. So we get a nice little mixture of thyme, Brussels pieces, all the little crispy bits, and then we'll just, as we cut our little handfuls, we'll just throw them right into our bowl. This is a good way to get folks to eat Brussels sprouts too who are opposed to the visual of what they really are. I showed Brussels sprouts to my younger siblings once and they were like, "It's tiny cabbage." And I was like, exactly, what's the problem? So this is about a pound of Brussels sprouts, and this will give you a nice sort of side portion for probably 6 to 8 people. This is what I've got for our Brussels, nice and chopped up, but we still have some good little chunks in there for some texture too. Nuts tend to hold, because they're pretty fatty, they tend to hold heat for quite a while. So that's why we just put them in for the last few minutes, because they'll hold on to that heat from the oven for quite some time and continue to toast. So I'm, again, just roughly running my knife through the almonds. I'm pretty much just making sure I am at least halving most of the almonds. And if not, like quartering them. So I don't want them to be super fine. These almonds really give you a good little crunch in here. And I'm going to add about 1/2 cup of golden raisins. I chose the golden raisins because they're pretty. They look really nice with the sort of greens and browns, kind of reddish tones that we have in here. If you have just regular raisins at home, those are perfectly fine as well. There is very, very slight difference in the flavor of those versus the golden raisins. This would also be really yummy for more of like a seasonal salad if you want to, with like cranberries in the winter. You could do some dried cranberries. You could also add like sage to this if you want to do that instead of the thyme or in addition to the thyme. But for today, we're going to go for golden raisins. And the warmth of our Brussels sprouts mixed with the dressing that we're going to add is going to actually like plump up those raisins a little bit and give them a whole new lease on life. It's going to be delicious. So we've got our lovely honey mustard here, all perfectly emulsified from all of our shaking. I'm going to add another couple of pinches. Like I said, I love thyme, so I'm making sure we have plenty of thyme flavor. A couple big pinches of thyme in here. And then just about, I'm going to start with 1/2 cup-ish of the dressing. So this is something, you can measure this at home. You can also just kind of eyeball it. It's really up to you how dressed you want your salad. And also, when you're making the dressing, if you don't like it super sweet or you like it a little more tart, you can adjust those things as you go. So you can do a little less maple, a little more vinegar, a little more mustard if you want it more like spicy. So this is the point where I'm going to not use my hands anymore. So I'm just going to go in here with a spoon and just mix this around. I always think and tell folks to mix it a few more turns than you think you need to, because there are generally little like pockets of dressing or pockets of raisins or different components in there. And I want to just make sure that they're all nice and evenly distributed. And so this is what we're looking for, a really evenly distributed, nice little, just like we did at the beginning with the Brussels, everything's nice and glossy and coated. And I'm going to give it a taste. You can see I left my salt and pepper and dressing out here so that I can adjust if needed. Get a nice little bite with everything on it. It's delightful. So this is where, you know, if you're like, oops, I didn't add enough salt, add another sprinkle of salt, add some more dressing if you want to. I can taste the thyme. I can taste the sweet, tangy dressing. I can taste all the little brown parts of the Brussels. And I got some good little almond crunchy bits in there. And the golden raisins really take it to another level with the sweetness for just little kind of pops of that. And as it sits, they'll get even sweeter. So I'm going to put this in a nice little plate so it's not in our mixing bowl anymore. Plate it up all pretty. And this, when I was testing this recipe, I just ate almost this whole bowl myself, just warm like this. It's so, so good. But like I said, you can either serve this immediately all nice and warm, or you can put this in a container and just keep it in your fridge to snack on throughout the week. Roasted Brussels vegan honey mustard salad.